Good afternoon. My name is Snyder. I'm president of Field to Market, the Alliance for Sustainable Agriculture. I'm the only one on this panel that is not actually from a company, and so I'm not sure what I'm doing on this business panel. But we are a multi-stakeholder alliance based in the United States that looks at the sustainability of commodity crop production. And we have 112 members from across the food and ag supply chain that represent a lot of companies, including some that are on the panel. And so what I'm going to talk about for the next few minutes is a little bit about our experience with helping companies not only think through the goals that they've set, but then how they work back upstream with farmers and with the supply chain to meet those goals. So Field to Market is the Alliance for Sustainable Agriculture. Our mission is to focus on defining, measuring, and advancing the sustainability of food, fiber, and fuel production in the United States. That's very important because we really started off 10 years ago with just trying to really figure out what we needed to measure. And so I know the Roundtable here has gone through a lot of the same things in developing indicators. We began that process nearly 10 years ago as well. Our membership spans 5 different sectors, all of which are reflected on this screen. The grower sector has had a strong presence since day one, including Farm Bureau and the corn growers and soybean growers and things of that nature. We obviously have the agribusiness sector, which includes Cargill on this panel. We have the food and retail sector, which also includes McDonald's, which is on this panel. We have NGOs, including the World Wildlife Fund and others that are also available, participate in the Global Roundtable here. And then lastly, the public sector partners such as universities and also the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So here's just a few examples of commitments that some of our members have made publicly that I think have had quite an impact in terms of the supply chain needing to sort of respond to these things. And again, we are not focused on beef, but I do think that a lot of the principles and things that we've worked on in the past few years have relevance in terms of practices. So Coca-Cola, for example, they have said they wanted to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by 25% by 2020. General Mills recently announcing they want to reduce their emissions by 28% by 2025. Unilever has a 50% reduction across all of their environmental impacts by 2020. And Walmart specifically calling out a fertilizer optimization goal on 14 million acres of U.S. farmland. So obviously when these public statements get made, there's a lot that is underneath of those commitments, but also oftentimes not always a clear pathway to how they're going to be accomplished. So working with partners really becomes critical. So Field to Market established some guiding principles that I think allowed us from the beginning to navigate around really challenging and complex subject matter. The first thing is that we decided to engage the full supply chain, including producers. We always wanted to have farmers at the table, and I think there's obvious reasons for that. We also decided to focus specifically on commodity crops with unique supply chain and traceability issues, so we don't do fruits and vegetables. But we do have all the major commodity row crops, which, with the intersection with this work here that you all are doing, of course, is on the feed side. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit as we go. We have science-based, outcomes-based, and technology-neutral principles, which is probably not unlike the beef roundtables in terms of making sure that we're focused on actual outcomes rather than any specific practices. And then, of course, commitments to individual grower data privacy and an emphasis on continuous improvement, many of the same principles that you all operate under. We do look at corn, soy, wheat, cotton, rice, and potatoes. We are potentially in 2017 looking at some additional ones, including alfalfa, sugar beets, corn silage, barley, peanuts, sorghum, and oats. You get a flavor for the type of, the scope of our work. There are 8 indicators that we are specifically focused on in the United States around crop production, and they include land use, soil erosion, soil carbon, water use, energy use, greenhouse gas emissions, water quality, and then biodiversity, which is being currently piloted. So that brings me to really the heart of what I wanted to share with you all today, which is once Field to Market really began to get its definitions around what we were measuring and how we were measuring, and we began actually publishing some reports around U.S. trend lines over the past 30 years, and those reports became quite useful in terms of setting baselines, companies really said, what can we do to bend the curve moving forward? and what kinds of programs do we need to put in place to drive improvement into the future, and how can those things lead to public-facing claims that can be used commercially or in business-to-business transactions. So it's great to have a body of technical work, but it's another thing altogether to put it into practice in actual sourcing programs. And so in 2014, Field to Market took a really critical step forward in establishing a supply chain sustainability program that had 3 key components, which I'm going to talk through. The first was benchmarking sustainability performance, so really just understanding where we are currently. The second is catalyzing continuous improvement, where are those opportunities to actually make improvements. And then lastly, enabling sustainability claims. So under benchmarking sustainability performance, the first thing we did is that we developed a pre-competitive tool called the Fieldprint calculator that allowed us to work with numerous companies with a common measurement framework where they could go back with the farmers in their supply chains and really use a common way to measure against these 8 indicators. And this Fieldprint calculator is now in use on more than 2.5 million acres in the United States, and that's growing every year in terms of its application in the field. Then these companies often, once they begin engaging the farmers with a calculator, with an assessment tool, and that feedback is being provided to the grower, the goal, of course, is to ensure that it's a two-way conversation. So it's not just about reporting down the supply chain. It's one of the complaints that we often hear from farmers is that in these sustainability schemes, it's all about reporting, but that information gets dumped into a black hole and it's not particularly useful for the grower on their own operation. And so one of the things we've been really committed to, and I think is critical for the success of any sustainability program, is how do you make that information valuable back to the producers so that they can make improvements in their own operations. And so oftentimes companies, when they're working with farmers with the calculator, with these tools, they will also bring groups of growers, cohorts of growers together to talk about benchmark comparisons, to talk about who's really, in an anonymous fashion, who's lagging, who's leading, and looking at resources that are available to make these improvements. And that engagement is really, really critical to actually being able to improve the metrics and improve the numbers over time. And then lastly, the ability for the supply chain to actually aggregate this field level data in a standardized fashion, in an anonymized fashion, to enable downstream sustainability claims and to create a verification process so that everyone is approaching this the same way. And if you've got competitors like Coke and Pepsi and General Mills and Kellogg's that are using this program, that ultimately the data that they are reporting, you have the confidence that it's analogous and that it's consistent across the entire supply chain. So here's a snapshot of the Fieldprint calculator at a field scale, where a farmer actually has the ability to draw borders around their own field. We then work very closely with the U.S. Department of Agriculture to gather, in real time, get the existing soils data for that field. So there's a database that exists, of course, that allows us to get the slope and the soil type and bring that into the calculations, and then the farmer continues to enter data on that field, and then ultimately comes up with a series of pieces of feedback, data that they receive on their score. And this is just an example of a summary output that an individual farmer receives. This is not necessarily the view that the company gets, but the individual farmer gets this on each specific field that they enter, which then allows them to compare against state averages, national averages, and even local averages and project benchmarks as appropriate. So we're in the process this year really of launching not just the Fieldprint calculator, but a Fieldprint platform that I think is something that for all of us in agriculture to be considering, which is how do we move beyond very sort of limited tools into something that can be spread across a whole host of proprietary tools, and giving farmers lots of options in terms of how they do sustainability assessments. So what we said is, look, we know that the data revolution in agriculture is happening and it's real, and farmers are collecting data for lots of purposes these days to improve their management, and there's a host of proprietary tools that are in the field that are being used by farmers for record keeping and for a host of things. And so rather than asking a farmer to go and just use Field to Market's website to re-input all of that information, we really need to integrate with those existing systems that farmers are already using and try to make this much more seamless in terms of their overall management of their land. And so we are beginning to integrate into other farm management software. Some of the earliest announcements will be coming out next month around tools that have specifically integrated with Field to Market that will make that whole process a lot easier for farmers and will allow us to scale much more quickly in terms of data collection, which helps the entire supply chain. We currently have 56 supply chain projects across 20 states. As I mentioned, it's about 2.3 million acres of engagement across those 6 crops that I previously outlined, kind of to give you a sense of the scale right now. Our membership has set a goal of 50 million acres by 2020, which is coming up quickly, but that means that if we meet that goal, we will increase the current level of engagement by 25 times, 25x over what we're doing right now. And so it is not just another sort of niche sustainability program. This is something that's intended to be applied in a pre-competitive fashion across U.S. agriculture very broadly. Then, as we move towards that last leg of the stool of how do you enable supply chain sustainability claims within a pre-competitive process, we realized we needed to develop claims tiers and verification processes that would give confidence in whatever companies were communicating. And so we came up with 3 tiers of claims that our membership has adopted. And the first one is a participation claim, which is quite simply any company that is at the part of the Roundtable, part of the Alliance in our example, that is active in that program and supporting it, and so they can make a participation claim that they're contributing to an industry initiative. The second is a measurement claim, and a measurement claim is really that measures progress and engaging growers within a supply chain. Typically, these are in the early years, in the first 1 to 4 years. These are snapshots in time, so it could be just how many farmers is a company working with on sustainability. It could be as simple as that. Or it could be a snapshot of what the greenhouse gas profile looks like for that sourcing region for one single year. It is not a claim of improvement. That comes into effect under an impact claim, and that actually quantifies sustained improvements or reductions against our metrics over time and requires a minimum of 5 years of data in order to make such a claim. Because if you look at clearly, if you look at trend lines or if you look year over year within agriculture, particularly in crop production, we're so weather dependent that to make a comparison 1 year to the next is not really an accurate picture. It's also not fair to the grower because there's lots of variables that are outside of their control. So we've said to companies, you really do need to be engaged for 5 years before you can begin to talk about overall improvements within a supply chain. And so our membership has unanimously adopted this framework. We're in the process of finalizing the impact claims protocols by the end of this year, but the other 2 pieces are already in place, and we do have companies that are coming forward to get the participation and measurement claims approved and verified. The claims process within Field to Market is, we tried to keep it fairly simple, but basically those 56 projects that I showed on the map previously, we require a project registration so that we know where our metrics are being used out on the on the ground across the United States, and so that registration information is submitted at the beginning of a project, and then once a year there's annual reporting on what's happening within that project. So it could just be the number of farmers, it could be just basic information on who within that specific supply chain or within that region is participating in that on a once a year basis. We get that update, and then ultimately when it's time for a company to make a claim, there's a specific claims request form that is submitted. And we then review that information, review the data that is available. And then lastly, for impact claims, once we reach that point, we're not there yet, but it will likely require some form of third-party verification that would be at the project level, at the company level, not necessarily grower audits. We actually have, for a lot of reasons, have gotten resistance to that at the grower level, but still being able to check to see that certain processes were followed and the data sets are available to actually make a claim. And so that third-party verification process would likely take effect next year for impact claims only. And so that process has been built out. I'm feeling pretty confident and really excited about the way that this is developed and really the level of support from across the supply chain that we've seen in getting something like this right. Because in the early years, we had companies wanting to get closer relationships with their supply chain, wanting to have more transparency, wanting to engage more with farmers, but not really quite sure how to do it. And we needed to create something that really created value for everyone, not just for one end of the supply chain or the other, but something that provided opportunities for everyone. And we think that this system is achieving that.